o, iyakowa, lerikowa, iyakowa, lerikowa o.
Awawa de o, chukowa, lerikowa o.
Iyakowa, lerikowa, iyakowa, lerikowa o.
Awawa de o, chukowa, lerikowa o.
Otunkowa, lerikowa, iyakowa, lerikowa o.
Awawa de o, chukowa, lerikowa o.
Otunkowa, lerikowa, otunkowa, lerikowa o.
Awawa de o, chukowa, lerikowa o.
Otunkowa, lerikowa, otunkowa, lerikowa o.
Awawa de o, chukowa, lerikowa o.
Amolebi, 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 ochun amolebi.
Born for me, or a rocker born for me, or a rocker born for me, a rocker born for me. Ebony, 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 a shaker born for me, or shaker born for me, or shaker born for me, or shaker born for me. Ebony, ebony. Ebony, ebony, a rubber born for me, or rubber born for me, or rubber born for me, or rubber born for me. Ebony, bone for me. Oh, rock a bone for me. Oh, rock a bone for me. Ebony, 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 ebony. Oh, knock a bone for me. Oh, knock a bone for me. Oh, knock a bone for me. Oh, knock a bone for me.
Good afternoon. Welcome and thank you for joining us for this creative conversation. My name is Dale Jennings. I'm a volunteer with the Miami Museum of Contemporary Art of the African Diaspora, where we strive to showcase the most advanced artists of the global African diaspora. Through our creative conversation series, we seek to facilitate a conversation and create a space where artists and their ideas and process can take center stage. Today, I'm excited to introduce T. Eliott Mansa, who will discuss his latest exhibit titled For Those Gathered in the Wind, which will be on display at L&S Gallery from this December 2nd to February 7th, 2021. A Miami native, T. Eliott Mansa has developed an assemblage practice that incorporates materials from roadside memorials, applying ritual practices from West African, Caribbean, and Southern religious and vernacular sculptural traditions. The result is a body of work that incorporates found materials in a way that subverts the original intent, reimagining them as apotropaic objects. His intention is to trigger the radical imagination of viewers, encouraging them to subvert the status quo and find socio-political agency in their own communities. We have two fantastic people joining Mr. Mansa in conversation this afternoon. Melissa Hunter-Davis is the editorial director and founder of Sugarcane Magazine, which is a Black art and cultural media company that focuses on the visual and performing arts from Africa and the African diaspora. Donnamarie Baptiste is the curator of For Those Gathered in the Wind and also served as the curator of Miami MoCAAD's 2019 pop-up exhibit, Reconstructing Identity, an exploration of identity and diaspora through artistic practice. I would like to thank everyone behind the scenes who is helping to make this event possible. Thanks to Michelle Johnson, Luz Cruz, Corbin Graves, and the team at L&S Gallery. This afternoon's program will feature a conversation between T. Eliott Mansa, Donnamarie Baptiste, and Melissa Hunter-Davis. A virtual tour of the exhibit will follow, as well as a Q&A and closing remarks by Marilyn Hollifield. Please send any questions in the Q&A section of Zoom or through our Facebook Live comment section. Before we begin, please note that everyone is muted upon entry for ease of conversation. Also, this session is being recorded. If you would like to opt out, you're more than welcome to join us on Facebook Live. Thank you all again, and without further ado, Melissa Hunter-Davis.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Before we begin, I would like for us to take the time to remember J.B. Harris. J.B. Harris is the victim of the first recorded lynching of an African-American in Miami. He was murdered on this day in 1920. I would like to take a moment to remember him and to send light to his soul. If you all join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. T. Eliott Mansa, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm great. I'm great.
So I'm really excited. I don't have the date, but some years ago, I sent one of my writers, Angela Carroll, up to New York and said, hey, you know, there's this brother from Miami. I've seen his work. I really love it. I would love for you to do a studio visit with him. He's at Hunter College. She went. She really enjoyed what she saw. And I'm going to read something before we get started, something that she wrote from that studio visit. Sights of mourning are marked by familiar objects, deflated balloons and toys strapped to light posts, flowers and liquor bottles, candles and candy. These indicators dot city landscapes and remind the community that tragedy occurred. Countless misfortunes are remembered with similar memorials, and so much more go unsung. It's easy to overlook the memorials that proliferate in the city. In The Wake on Blackness and Being, theorist Christina Sharp describes the perpetuity of traumas African American communities experience with nautical and colonial terminology: the wake, the ship, and the hold. The conditions Sharp articulates reveal devastating implications. Each new iteration of violence against Black bodies builds on preceding violence that ultimately trigger and re-aggravate trauma on a cellular, physical, and psychological level. Discoveries about the residual impact and long-term effects of racist violence on the body and psyche of African Americans are emerging. Still, I cannot help but wonder if Black identities are doomed to endure a perpetual state of mourning. That was just a snippet of something written by Angela Carroll some years ago, might have been in 2016, 2017. And here we are in 2020, where those words still ring true. So 2020 has been a year for the books, for each and every one of us, for absolutely everyone across the globe. What did you learn this year that will inform your practice in 2021?
Well, I definitely learned that very similar to what Wilkerson talks about in Afro-pessimism, what Sharp talks about, that this is a perpetual state. And this work really, partially deals with how Black bodies have been almost used as offerings to the West and to the hegemonic powers, and for the sake of capital, et cetera. So basically, I've had the time to work, and I've just been trying to knock this stuff out, trying to keep on going, and trying to align myself with the goals and desires of the ancestors. Because I do think when you align yourself with those intentions, they guide you along.
So T, we know you as a painter. For those of us who've known you for a long time, that's what we've seen a lot from you. But you've moved. This particular show is full of assemblage. Can you tell us about that move and what inspired it?
Okay, well, around, I'll say maybe between 2012 and 2013, after Trayvon Martin was killed, I really was unsure of what it meant to be a political artist, because I considered myself a political artist, but in reality, I was more of a portrait painter, more so than a figurative painter, but specifically a portrait painter. And I felt powerlessness. I had to keep questioning whether or not I was being effective. So I started to look towards these West African practices, specifically Boccio sculptures. So that led me into not assemblage, but collage. So certain acts like the cutting, the weaving, these things, they were still to an extent paintings, and still to an extent a little like two-dimensional, but pushing towards relief. And the more I was afraid of going towards three-dimensionality, I just dove into it. And I also wanted to not just rely on the writings in an artist statement or in a press release. I wanted the work itself to start the conversation.
So this was a bloody summer for America. All right, we had the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. We had the effects of C-19. How did the events of 2020 lead up into the work that we see today?
Well, I think that it helped to be very specific, because I think when you on the microstructure, if you zoom into a very specificity, it's easier to go to the universal after that. And I also felt like the work was very timely, because there's a point where when things aren't in the news cycle, they tend to disappear from people's memory. So this wasn't just work that looked back towards 5 years ago or 6 years ago. This is work that is very relevant to the times that we're in. And I just hope that it can reach as many people as possible.
So you mentioned traveling. You traveled to Benin some time ago, and that trip was very important to you.
Yeah.
Tell us about the trip and what do we see from that trip that is now in the work that we're looking at?
Well, I went to Cotonou, I went to Benin in early 2018, and I was able to study and look at the Boccio sculptures that I'd been studying in books and through a kind of Western art history lens. And seeing it in person, I realized that when we go to a museum and see African sculptures, it's cut in maybe 20% of its intentional value, because it's only one out of the 5 senses, right? So seeing all these rituals and seeing the works in the context that they were meant to be during the Vodun festival, it really gave me a better outlook. And I also realized that there are various cities and various places in the diaspora where the spiritual systems survived in their entirety. You can see the same exact things in Havana, in Miami, in New Orleans, in Ouida, you know. So it made me realize that the myth of Black people being like a empty slate and that our history was completely wiped out, that's BS, you know. And I think we need to link to a larger Pan-African sensibility, because I might call my Africa Overtown or Carol City. You may call your Africa Trinidad, but we're still African people throughout the diaspora. So I really, you know, appreciated seeing that. And I also traveled to Havana prior to that trip a couple of years earlier. So it was definitely intriguing seeing all of these cities that are under the umbrella of the Vodun and Yoruba cosmology.
So you just mentioned your Africa, and one of the things that I love to do with artists is, before I even talk about their work, I like to talk about them. By the time they finish telling me their story, their work to me is already explained. So tell me about your Africa. Tell me about your early years and how it manifested into you becoming a visual artist.
Well, I think my Africa is that in hip hop, we pour out a little liquor, and that's pouring libations. There are all these different Africanisms that are in the diaspora day-to-day lives. And also I've had two of my best friends that were killed in gun violence. All these different, I lost my family. I have family members that were or have been locked up as felons, locked up in the state prisons. So I think there is a suffering that is something that we all experience, because we have the same boot or knee on our necks all throughout the diaspora. It's the same, you know, oppressor. So I really feel that, you know, on the weekends, or if you go to different carnivals in different cities and seeing the masquerades, like all of that comes out of Western and Central African traditions. So things like that, I feel like are ways that we can embrace a wider sense of identity and move away from a kind of nationalist approach.
Whenever I look at the pieces, in particular the piece behind you, I see toys. I see, you know, dolls and doll seats, and it reminds me of the public memorials, for example, to Sherdavia Jenkins in Liberty City. Sometimes as you're driving through Liberty City, you'll see these small public memorials around the area with with teddy bears and children's toys for children who are lost. And it could be anything from gun violence to maybe a hit and run. I see all of these pieces. So tell me about the place for them and also the materials of those pieces. You know, they're plastic toys. Plastic toys, you know, I'm a mother of 2 girls. Your house swims in plastic until at least the age of 12, right? So tell me about the pieces that you use in that and also what the materials mean as well.
Well, for one, I use different, like, you know, according to Vanitas traditions and various art forms that speak to the precariousness of life and the fleeting times. But for me, if you give someone flowers that are picked and they rot, that's a one-time thing. But I incorporated plastic because it's something that's gonna last generations after generations. And that's something that we have dealt with, like this continuous cycle of death, this continuous offering of our bodies for the sake of other people's power. And I also didn't want to create still lifes of Western sculptures, because I realized that there's a spiritual technology that is a part of these sculptures. So I wanted to be respectful and also wanted to, for me, sometimes you have to approach things in polarities. So treating something Western that we see in the diaspora, but using it an aesthetic of the Boccio and Nkisi sculptures. For me, that was a way to synthesize those differences into a new practice.
And you're talking about divine technology, essentially. And so that also, we see that in the colors that you use for this. There are pieces that are red, there are pieces that are black. There's some pieces that look dark blue to me, but I'm not sure if they're dark blue or black. Can you tell me about the use of color?
Well, it goes back to the duality that I was just speaking of. Because if you go to any toy store or any Walmart, because toy stores don't exist anymore, you see that children's toys are usually primary colors. Like the very young age, you'll see the red, yellow, and blue. So on the Western side, stripping those colors away from these objects and painting them black, that kind of refers to the Western ideas of mourning, because that's the color that we associate with funerals. Yet in the Vodun cosmology, black is the color of life. So, and also I use monochrome because in the art tradition, from light to dark, that's value. So for me, I wanted to manipulate, value, add value to our lives. So, modulating things within the range from light to dark in that monochromatic way was something, like I said, using the materials, using the art to talk about what I want the work to be rather than, you know what I mean?
Gotcha. So before I bring in the curator, Donnamarie, I just real quick, your life as a Black man informed all of your work to date. And there's a generation of young Black men coming behind you who are trying to find their voice. And once they find that voice, they will tell their stories and they will tell our story. And I'm starting to feel a little emotional, darling. They will tell their stories and our stories. What is your advice to them as they move forward?
My advice to them is to prioritize Black liberation. We tend to think of, our politicians as the only people who have power, but we, the people, have the power. So take your time and put your efforts, put all of your spiritual energy and all of your efforts into honoring your ancestors, into empowering yourselves, into figuring all this out. Shut out some of the media, shut out the self-destructive mentalities and the cultural things that come out of that destruction that we have in our communities. And also read, man, you know, dive into rigor, like push yourself to the limits and realize how strong we truly are. And I also want to say, before I move on, I want to say that even though I'm a Black man, African people, all Black lives are dealing with the same shit. So that speaks for trans people, children, women, as well as Black men. And it's not just something that, because, you know, I don't want to end up holding up patriarchy and trying to tear down another power structure.
Gotcha. So I want to bring Donnamarie in for this conversation about color. We're kind of going to bounce back to this. We had a great conversation about the color blue and hate blue. So if you can tell me a little bit more about the use of colors for the walls, because typically when you see an exhibit, you just have that same basic white wall, but that's not what you guys did for this show. I saw this beautiful, beautiful light blue, kind of a light sky blue. And I love the importance of this. So if we can bring Donnamarie in, because she told a great story about her personal life with this color as well. If you can tell us about not just the work in the show, but also the way you mounted the show and you have the show seen for others to enjoy.
Sure. Well, first of all, it is a stunning show. And it comes from such a place of passion, as you could tell by listening to T speak. So my job as a curator was really to contextualize this work that he so deeply and so rigorously has worked through and thought through. And I started actually with reading his MFA thesis, which really set the tone for the essay that I wrote and set the tone for the way that the exhibition is hung. So the Hate Blue is really interesting because T. Eliott and I often go back and forth around what we're reading or what we've read lately or what we've, you know, that kind of thing. So I happened to come across an article that I read, and I don't remember where, but I did send it to T, around the color Hate Blue, because we've been talking a lot about the traditions of African people, of the African diaspora, particularly West Central Africa, and how we've maintained those traditions through the Middle Passage to the US. And particularly we focused on the South because he's from the South, he's from Miami. I was born in the Caribbean, but I lived a great deal of my life in the South. And when I was young, one of the houses that I grew up in was blue, was this light blue, and it was a Hate Blue. And I've never really thought about it until I started revisiting Hate Blue, why that color has always been, this color has always been so important to me. I just loved it so much because I was so happy in that home. But so I found this article on Hate Blue, I sent it to T, and we agreed that I said, we have to have blue in the space. And I did pull up, as you go through the exhibition, you'll see, I did give some context to some different sections, because for those of us that may not be from the South or even of the Black diaspora, I wanted to make sure that you feel welcome and that you understand what's going on in the show. So this is just a little excerpt about Hate Blue. Indigo dye and the symbolic use of the color blue for protection are deeply rooted in West African spiritual traditions. Hate is an old Southern word for a ghost or evil spirit from the Carolina coastal region. Enslaved Africans on the low country plantations of South Carolina believed blue would protect them and their descendants, the Gullah Geechee, from haints and boo hags. Now, boo hags are dangerous evil spirits that bring harm by slipping into your home while you're sleeping. The color blue was said to trick haints into believing that they've stumbled into water, which they cannot cross, or the sky, which will lead them farther away from their intended victims. So the color blue is used as protection. And T's the whole exhibition is about Black mourning and about bringing in spiritual practices to protect our communities from further danger. So I said it just makes complete sense for us to use Haint Blue. So we use 2 different blues on different walls. Haint Blue is now more of a concept than it's actually an actual color, and the color kind of ranges from a light sky blue to a sea green blue. So we went with kind of a bluish, grayish, greenish color on one wall, and then we have kind of a sky blue on a section of the exhibition that we call the porch wall, because throughout South Carolina, throughout the South really, but I want to focus mostly on the Georgia Low Country, Northern Florida Low Country, and South Carolina Low Country. You'll see this color blue on porches, on doors, on window shutters, or even whole houses throughout the South. And the reason why is obviously for protection reasons. And that comes directly from the enslaved of Africa that brought that tradition with them, because blue, the color blue and the history of indigo are deeply rooted in Western Central Africa.
I love it. So is this a great time to see the show? Can we now do this tour? Can we work on this wonderful tour?
It's totally, I'm game if you guys are.
I think we're ready. And I think we can pass this on to you, because I think this tour is now in your hands. Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Sergio. So, oh my gosh, please let me shout out Sergio Cernuda and his beautiful wife, Luisa, and their amazing team, Sophia, Isabella, and Freddie, who helped T and I so much.
Oh,
who are so instrumental in this show being as beautiful as it is. And not to mention that they have a gorgeous space already. So here we go. We're gonna start. This is the entrance, as you can see. To the left, you'll see we have the part of the essay that I wrote, and one of T's lovely sculptures, a smaller sculpture. And then if we can swing around to the right wall, so you can see the beginning of the installation. Wow, Sergio, you've got this down to a science now. So we started here with some of the smaller works that T, from his previous, it's a previous body of work, and it's as stunning as ever. So we have those, and then can you swing up to the table so everyone can see the beautiful table that greets you when you walk in, Sergio?
We'll do that.
Yeah, there we go. So so at the entrance, when you first walk into your right, we have this table just sitting there, and I was like, we need to do something with this table. So T and I came up with the idea of, I always think that when people see an assemblage, they don't really understand all of the work and all of the tools and all of the things that go into making that. So I thought, let's show them, you know, a little behind the scenes. So when you look at the table, you can see the fabric that we used in the project room, which we'll see later. You'll see some of the dolls and some of the kind of offerings that we've used, shells, and then some of the reference materials that we've used just over the time, just reading, you know, because we're constantly voraciously reading things about the Black diaspora. So this kind of gives you insight when you first walk in and you see this, you're wondering what that is. Those are some of the things that you're going to see that are part of the assemblage that you will never be able to pick out. But here they are unpainted and in real life. Okay, yeah, so let's mosey through. Let's stop at this first sculpture right here. So this is one of his medium-sized sculptures. Look at that, wow, it's stunning. That is beautiful. What's the name of this one? Okay, Marching and Singing with Yesterday's Coffin on Their Heads. So T, I wanted to ask you about the names of some of these works, because all of the works have such interesting names. And I was looking through, I was rereading your thesis the other day, and there were some really great names. There was like, gosh, The Beautiful Ones, I think, and like there was a Prince song, which I was like, yay, Prince. And there was, I can't remember the names. That was the one that stuck out, obviously, but all of the names of the works have such interesting names. And I just wanted to, if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it actually is so intriguing how these things work. In the playlist, I think you added the Macintosh
yes.
ring shout. So
Yes.
it's one of it. That's I got the title from one of their songs.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
We're always in sync.
Yes. Yes.
That's great. So for those of you listening out there, we have a playlist to go along with the show, and that's another thing that we synced on because I like to do playlists just because they're fun for me, and I think they add a little something to the show. They're not necessary, but T was also I was thinking that I wanted to do one, but I hadn't spoken to him about it yet. And he said to me one day, you know, I'm putting together this playlist, and I was like, what? Oh my God, I have a playlist. So I was like, let's put our playlist together. So that's basically what we did. I made a playlist for Reconstructing Identity, the pop-up that I did with for Miami MoCAAD. And so I took some of those songs because there was a lot of that kind of music in there. T was also in that exhibition. And then just looked for as much music as I could find around the Gullah people, and some great old Negro spirituals. And of course had to put Strange Fruit on there. So there's both versions. There's the Nina version and the Billy version, because how are you going to choose between which one? And then T had this really great drumming and this spiritual drumming music that he had this wonderful compilation of drumming from Benin. And so we just put all of that together, and I just spent like days just kind of going through, and we made this wonderful playlist that you guys might have heard in the waiting room. So that will accompany the show as well as you're walking through the space. Okay, let's move forward. Let's see. Oh, let's go over to the porch. Can we go over to the porch? Or no, or should we? Yeah. Yeah, there we go. So as you enter deeper into the space, to your right, we call this the porch room, or the porch space. That and there's that beautiful sky blue paint blue. That's one of my favorite colors in the world. And the pieces are kind of speaking to each other in this space, in this area of protection. So we kind of thought about recreating that Southern Gullah porch, and had the pieces speaking to each other and protecting the space. And let's zoom in on the round piece really quickly so people can see that. Isn't that, oh, it's so beautiful. So I really thought that this piece needed to be in the center of the space. Victory of John Henry, what a great name. Because it is one of the few large pieces, it's the only large piece in this show that is round, but it's one of the few large pieces that doesn't have large offerings on it. So it's much more kind of a subdued offering that I think is just really stunning. And it's also one of the few Black, I think it might be the only Black assemblage piece that has any color to it left. So T made the creative choice to leave this piece with a little bit of color. And why was that, T?
This piece was from a little bit earlier. So I ended up cannibalizing different older pieces to add this. And I think, when we were installing the work, we talked about how choosing to be purely Black caused a lot of problems. And then the other ones that we use a little bit of color, it helps the work. So that, because when you paint something all Black, anything that you don't cover, you see it, and it kind of brings unwanted attention. But if you use the other colors and drip it on it, or just you have it pop up, it helps to unify it in a way, and it doesn't draw the attention to spots that didn't get colored, right?
Got it. Great. Okay, let's move slowly through so people can see how beautiful it is. And just a quick little backstory that I told the team yesterday, but this area is so special because I couldn't decide about, this is one of my favorite colors, but I couldn't decide between, where the blue should go. So we decided that we wanted to kind of recreate this Southern porch, as I said earlier. And so Sergio, who's the owner of the gallery, thought, you know, it would be really great to do this a border, like a border, like a porch border at the top. And yeah, isn't it? It's beautiful. So we were like, so we grab a selection. We get a selection. Freddie gets us a selection of different borders, and we're looking at the different borders. And I'm just like salivating because I'm so excited, because it's just I just know how gorgeous it's going to look. Because I saw this in my mind, but I didn't know that I saw this in my mind, you know. So when we actually had the borders there, it was just so exciting for us. So anyway, this is kind of the finished product. Can we just zoom in really quickly on this piece so I can show the difference? So between the John Henry piece and this piece, let's see, marching and singing with yesterday's coffin on their heads. What a great name. And you can see this piece has some of the same offerings, like the shells that the round piece, the John Henry piece has, but this one has this large kid's toy, which is, and guns. So I want to shout out Shire. I think she's out there. Hey, Shire Reagans, I know you're out there. This piece speaks directly to the work that you're doing over at Bakehouse. I thought about that last night, actually, when I was thinking about this show, that somehow I got to get you and T in the show together. We'll talk about that later. But this piece is kind of a very symbolic piece, kind of a now piece with the guns and this offering for this child that has died in some way that we don't know. So keep that in mind as you're looking at the works. Like, all of these works include offerings to the spirits. Wow, look at that view. I never get tired of looking at it. Oh. Wow. Ooh. Yeah, let's zoom in on this one a little bit. Wow. T, can you tell us a little bit about this work?
Yeah.
What is that big piece in the middle there?
It's the walker.
Right. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, I have different formal investigations that I have in the studio, because there was a point where I made, you'll see in a minute, these larger pieces. So I wanted to reverse some of the hierarchies, and also wanted to create a diverse range of pieces, because I did a lot of, like, this is half the size of the ones you're going to see in a bit. And I found that it really held the space, because the orientation kind of shifts a little bit. But, I wanted to break the horizontal rectilinear shape of the substrate. And I also wanted to play with the three-dimensionality in a very strong way. So because it's a smaller piece, the objects appear to be a lot bigger, and it appears to come out towards you a lot more.
Yeah, I agree. All right, I'm gonna say hi to a couple people that I see shouting us out. Let me see. Hi, Lonnie Johnson. Hey, Jennifer Prince. Who else do we see there? Okay. Hi, guys. Just want to say hi to everybody. Okay, let's go over to the other paint blue wall. Well, we can kind of see that whole section there is really beautiful. And then I don't know if we can get that corner in the back corner there, Sergio, the piece that we had to hang last, because it's, not that one, the other side, yeah, because it's kind of in the corner. Yeah, there we go. This piece is really interesting. It's got a lot going on. What's the name of this one? I don't remember the names of all of these. Elegies clustered in the waves of the wake. Beautiful.
And that specifically speaks towards the quote that Melissa read in the beginning, talking about the wake, and that we're metaphorically following the waves of the ships in the Middle Passage, that we're still living through these repercussions of these waves of sacrifice, So I also, this is another one where it's hard to see in a photograph, but the children's rocker, the rocking chair, it really comes towards the viewer in a special way. So, you know, that was something that I wanted to play with. And also I wanted to play with the patina, which is the texture, because being that they're monochromatic, you can play with how the surface looks and play with the different kind of varnishes and different kind of ways that light reflects or seems to. Some of them with the black gesso, it gets very matte. So putting that next to the satin finish of the flowers.
Wow, that's so beautiful. I never get tired of looking at these. Okay, so let's look at the, just kind of give a, yeah, just kind of a broad view of the works. So this is the other haint blue wall that we were talking about, and this is kind of a bluish gray, I'd say more of a grayish blue. Again, like we discussed, you know, haint blue is more of a concept than an actual color, so you have a lot of leeway. And I just wanted to show the differences and show that fact that it's not a specific thing, it's more of a concept. And again, you know, the haint blue and the offerings together in this space not only offer symbolic gestures of mourning, but also offer protection. And the black ceiling is just an added plus. That was already there, so we didn't do that. That's already in the space, and it looks fantastic. So we do have a couple of the smaller works over here. Yeah, isn't that, wow, what a beauty, it's beautiful. Just really quickly, I just wanted everyone to see some of those you might remember from Reconstructing Identity, T and I.
And I really love how placing that blue, that curatorial choice, how it plays with the negative and positive space. So how it it's inverted between
Absolutely.
the wall on the left. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, I see exhibitions in my head before I actually hang them. So I spend a lot of time thinking about the work, thinking about the context of the work, and thinking about the space. So I'll go to a space a few times, look at the floor, you know, I have to really get the space into my veins, and then I really think about the work and how I want to contextualize that work, or how best to present the work to an audience so that they understand it. What I hate more than anything is going to an exhibition, even though I work in the art world, and feeling like I'm not learning anything, I'm not seeing anything. A lot of times curators make choices, which I respect, to just allow the audience's thoughts and ideas and allow them to form their own opinions. And I think that choice is warranted in certain situations. But in this particular situation, this is a very specific concept, as you heard T discuss. And we wanted to stay very true to this show. It's not about anything else. It's about this. And so we wanted to make sure that everyone understands that. And so this is the pièce de la résistance. We love this. This is our project room. And the moment I saw that space for the very first time, I was like, oh, I'm gonna do something in that room. And so we talked about it, we went back and forth, and we're gonna go in so you guys can see what choices we made. Look how nice the gallery looks. Okay, so here we go. So we enter from the two sides, there's two side entrances, and here we are in the space. Isn't it beautiful? Wow. Never get tired of looking at it. So for the walls, we talked about what we wanted to do and what we wanted to say in this space. And T really felt like he wanted this to feel like a spiritual space, to feel like a safe place of mourning, to feel like a place of protection. And so we started riffing and going back and forth about like when I was a kid, that they were little obia shops, and they're Santeria shops in Cuba, in Spanish speaking countries. And it's voodoo shops or voodoo in Haiti or in Benin. So I was like, let's recreate that, but on another level. So I originally was thinking about painting the walls, or finding some kind of texture to the wall. And T was like, I found this fabric. I saw this fabric and I can't get it out of my mind. And I want to do something with this fabric. It's this black shiny fabric. And he's like, I want to do something with it. So anyway, we talked about, went back and forth. We decided let's see what it looks like on the wall. And this is what it looks like. It's phenomenal. We put it on the wall. Freddie put it on the wall. And we were just dumbstruck. It's stunning. And so we thought what a great way for us to talk about light, which is very much an important part of this show and a part of spirituality, West African spirituality, and to showcase the work in a way, because it's all monochrome. How are we going to make that work jump off the wall, jump off of a black wall? Well, you use a shiny fabric. So this piece is called, what's this piece called? So this is part of the series. And we have, so there's two. Okay, got it. Wow, that's beautiful. So this piece, T, just tell us really quickly a little bit about this piece, because what I find so interesting about this one, and the reason why I chose to put it here, is because it's this kind of perfect mix of child offerings, or should I say toys, and the perpetual flowers. So I was just wondering what creative choice did you make when you were making this sculpture? Because there's just something kind of special about it. And also it gives kind of a 3D, when you see it in person, it looks kind of more 3D, because it kind of comes off the wall in a sense, and the fabric adds to that.
Yeah, well, what happens with a lot of these pieces is that, it's like, how many ways can you make a sweet potato, right? So it's the same ingredients, but you can make a pie, you can make candy yams, you can make like all these different ways. So a lot of these elements are repeated, and I find new ways to kind of combine them. But this space, I mean, it really, it talks about the different nature of Black and the kind of metaphysical Black spaces, like the womb. There's no light in the womb, and even in the universe, in the night sky, there's simultaneously a deep darkness, but also the sky holds light. So I was really intrigued with this fabric because it's reflective, and it almost looks like stars, but it's also very dark. And also it's it's very shiny next to the very matte pieces. So that juxtaposition happens. And it's also, that space is very immersive, right? So, I wanted a place that felt like a release and felt like a shrine. And we always talked about how do we tease the viewers? How do we get people to not see everything, but also want to come in because you want what you can't really have at the moment? So you see how we have the drapes that cover certain sections of this glass. So that plays with what you can see. And the way this bottle sculpture is, it is something that you see on the other side, but you really can't tell. You can't see the three larger pieces from when you walk in the door.
Right. Yeah, and we had originally we'd originally talked about beads with the beads situation, where we were going to, because we were really stuck on, back in April we were talking about beads, right, T? We were like, we're gonna get those beads. Remember those beads when we were kids, and,
Yeah.
and our parents had those beads that were hanging down the, the separated rooms. You guys remember that of a certain age, all of us of a certain age. And we were like, we want those beads, and we could not find those beads. We can't find them. If anybody knows where to find them though, I'd still love to get them just for me personally, so hit me up. So what we did was we had so much leftover fabric because we didn't want to, when T bought the fabric, we were like, oh my God, the worst thing that could happen if we couldn't get more of the fabric, because the fabric was perfect. And so he bought a ton of fabric. So we had all this fabric left over, and we just hung the fabrics like drapes, and it just works so beautifully. It's perfect. We could not have framed the space any better. So it's just funny how those things happen. Some decisions that were made were deliberate. I had a very deliberate idea of what the show was going to look like in my head, and it looks like that. But some of the choices that we made along the way were kind of by happenstance, So, and that's the nature of the process. And so the rug is another example. We wanted, I wanted the floor black. We had to figure out how to get the floor black. We couldn't get the black carpet we wanted. So we got gray carpet and we spray painted it black. So, and I don't care because I just want the floor black. I saw it in my head. That's what it was going to be. And we got it there. And I think it looks stunning. And the bottle tree, I just want to talk a little bit about that. That was another decision. That was a deliberate decision that I made, that it was going to be in that space. And T loved the idea. I started sending him images. And I just wanted to tell you guys a little bit about the history of the bottle tree, just so that you understand why we made this choice. So I'm just going to read from the contextual cards that we have in the space. The bottle tree reflects the historical trajectory of the transatlantic slave trade from Africa through the Caribbean to the US. For centuries, Congolese captives were transplanted to the low country region of South Carolina and Georgia through the ports of Savannah and Charleston. So for those of you that don't know, Savannah and Charleston are the two major ports that slaves were brought into the country. Let's see. So African religious beliefs and the traditions that survived the brutality of the Middle Passage were passed down from generation to generation. And descendants from the region still continue that practice. They're known as the Gullah people. And they still reside along the areas of coastal Southern Carolina and Georgia. Ancestors of the Gullah were some of the first people in the American South to use bottle trees. Tree branches were cut short and empty bottles were placed upside down on the short limbs. The enslaved believed evil spirits were drawn to the bottles by the light of the moon and became trapped inside when they are forced to stay for the rest of the night. The sound of the wind blowing through the bottles was said to be the spirits wailing in discomfort. When the sun rises in the morning, it burns and destroys the evil spirits caught inside, and the empty bottles are free to wait for the next wandering spirits at night. So we thought that it just made sense to have, since we were already honoring the Gullah people, it made sense to put a bottle tree as a source of protection to capture those evil spirits. And we were thinking about, what kind of, what do we want this bottle tree to represent? We made the choice to have all of the bottles be blue to capture the spirits, because blue represents the sky. And the shells, which hi Andy. Andy had a question about the shells. The use of shells are to represent water. So normally bottle trees were placed in Trinidad or in Caribbean islands, in small regional, small communities, island communities. They're placed near water. And that's because they're placed at the intersection between the sky, between the two worlds, right? So water and the sky, water is the way that the spirits can enter and leave the world. And so the sky is represented by the blue bottles and the shells represent water. So when you see these bottle trees in the South, like around the Gullah region, or usually in front of an African-American home, which is not by water, you'll see shells around because they represent water. So that's why the shells are there.
And I also want to talk a little bit about the shells and the way they're tied to the memory jugs or the spirit jars.
Absolutely.
Because in the Congo, the world of the spirit is very synced with water. It's called Kalunga, and Kalunga is this water type area. So when these bottles are placed near the grave and these shells are placed near the grave, it helps guide them back across to join the ancestors, because in the Congo, they're different pieces of the soul. The same way, I mean, a lot of this stuff is migratory back to the pre-Ptolemites in Egypt. So that idea that the soul is broken apart into pieces, you have to break things that they use, and all this different process. So I really found it interesting how these things are happening in Alabama, and they're all a part of this diasporal logic. So, the shells that are incorporated throughout the wall pieces, throughout the bottle tree installation, and in the jars, that's that Congolese cultural remnant that Black people these spiritualities have survived in these smaller regional Africas, Alabama, or these smaller centers, but it's a united spiritual understanding.
Absolutely, it's something that has just been retained. It's spiritual memory. Yeah, I think it's something that it's the ancestors place within us, and it just travels with us from generation to generation. Really quickly about the memory jugs that T made. The Bakongo people believed that the spirit world was reversed, and they were connected to it by water. So jugs, pitchers, and vases were decorated with items from the person's life that might be needed in the afterlife. So the broken items that you see near the bottle tree, those are broken as a process that releases the spirit so it can help the dead in the next life. The original spirit jugs were made with, memory jugs were made with materials. The materials were attached by using putty, or like a clay, or a plaster, or a mortar, or something that the Africans could make, something they could make from the earth to put on the jug that would hold the items, to glue them on there. And T, you use clay, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So he, stayed pretty true to the original way that these items were made. These items were placed either near homes or near grave sites, and placed upside down. And unmarked gravesite decorations are found a lot throughout the South. You'll see these unmarked graves, but a lot of times you'll see these jugs, or you'll see bottles or cups, even sometimes, like turned upside down, that have these items on them. And until I really started diving into this project with T, I didn't know that, because I've seen those before in the South, and I never knew what they were. I knew there was something spiritual, but I didn't know what. And until we worked together, I think, on reconstructing identity the first time, I had no idea. So I've learned a lot throughout this process as well. So the broken plates, again, that you see here, those are used to, we had a lot of fun breaking those. And the whole team dived in, and we all broke stuff, and it was fun. And at the end of the day, I think we broke too much stuff. So we were selective about what we used, but we used cups, bowls, plates, and then shells. I was going to stick some forks in there, but I'm like, okay, that's enough. And a teddy bear, of course. So that's the show. Oops, sorry about that. That's the show, and this is the view looking into the space from the project room. And I think this is a good place to take some questions if we have. Do I throw it to Dale or Melissa?
I do have a question from, Miss Marilyn Hollyfield. She had a question about one of the titles. I think it was the John Brown title.
John Henry.
John Henry.
Well,
Can you talk a little bit about that?
okay, so there's, I don't know if it's because I'm such a nerd, but there's something that August Wilson said. He says, I want my work to be fat with meaning, So I got brain freeze there for a second, just thinking about that. So throughout all of the pieces, like if you look at some of the larger pieces, what I did was I attached toy railroad tracks to think about the Underground Railroad. So all of these pieces have these tracks of the Underground Railroad literally under all of the other pieces. So, we thought about the story of John Henry and that link to the railroads, and also simultaneously thinking of a tunnel, but also thinking about another Africanism that comes out of the Congo, which is the circle. Let the circle be unbroken, the circular ring shout. Ezekiel saw the wheel in the middle of the wheel. Like, what happens a lot in the diaspora is that the enslaved people would see things, and it was a way to syncretize. And that's something that African people were able to incorporate these things, because in the Congo, the markings for the cosmology looks like a cross. And the circle for Ezekiel's wheel, these things, and it's the same thing that happened in the Caribbean, like where there's this element that they recognize and it's linked to an ancestral narrative. And that's something that within the permitted understandings of what the slave masters didn't allow the enslaved people to do, it was like a sneaky way to slide it in.
Great. So, okay, I also have, is there another, so let's talk about the use of nails, because Andy has a question about nails. And you and I spoke a lot about this. So let's talk a little bit about the use of nails in the work.
Well, formally, the nails kind of, they link up, they're spread throughout, and it's again, another circle of the Ezekiel wheel. And also it ties to the Nkisi. So different metal, like metal swords are tied to Ogun. So I wanted to kind of acknowledge Ogun's role in the liberation of Haiti, and like being that first African nation and I call it an African nation. I'm not mincing words with, considering Haiti. They're in the African Union. So just using these different elements, but specifically it speaks to the Nkisi that we saw earlier, where the Nkisi they're like covered with nails for every time that something needs to be done for a client. They would nail a packet into the sculpture. So you see these sculptures with just covered with nails and I use tons of nails as well, but you can see them throughout the show. A little more subtle, a little smaller, but subtly there.
Yeah, and if you ever see, just for reference, Andy or anyone that's listening, if you just Google like Nkisi and Kondi sculpture, it's and she knows how to spell it. But you'll see a sculpture that is just covered in nails, and those sculptures are you find those all over Western and Central Africa, and they're used for protection. It's another protection symbol. We got some good questions. Here's a good one for you.
All right.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Camille, right? This work is so beautiful. I wonder what are some of his artistic influences, such as Mel Edwards or Leonardo Drew, and how that influence informs the work.
Well, there's something when we talk about the memory, right? Why is it that, like, I don't know if anyone saw the exhibit that was at the MoCAAD Nomi with the Port-au-Prince. So, you know, why is it that all throughout the diaspora, we use found objects and make assemblage with it? You know, why? And I don't really have the answer to that, except that it's a memory that is a physical memory, but it's something that I want to acknowledge Jack Whitten and Thornton Dow, Nary Ward, just all these different, Mel Edwards and all these different brothers and sisters who are kind of finding these common threads. And I really have to acknowledge them. And also have to acknowledge Nary Ward, who was my mentor and professor at Hunter. And man, like, I think I'm a masochist because I just wanted to stay another year to be like, yeah, I want to find a sculpture that you approve of, right? Because I was coming out of a painting space, and we talked about reversing the hierarchies. So if there's something that I do too much and it gets boring, I think about what's the thing I'm not doing? What's the opposite of this? So I was so afraid, because you know how there's the architect and the engineer? So I'm way more on the design side, the structural, how to make stuff not fall apart. Like I'm still like a 2D person at heart. So that was something that came up with the found objects, because before I went to wall pieces, I worked on standalone sculptures. So a lot of the walkers and the things that hold children, I was able to hold the materials and use the standalone objects almost like a substrate or like a stretcher that you would wrap the canvas in, something to hold it together. Because, you know, there was one point where I tried to make this standalone sculpture for the show, but with machetes, and it kept falling over. And I'm like, all right, there's no insurance that would dare let this piece stand alone where people are gonna knock it over and things like that.
I have another question that has come in that kind of builds on your last comment, T. How do you see your work evolving, and what medium would you like to explore next now that you've done assemblage and painting?
Listen, been doing art for 40 years. So all of this stuff is mine. Everything I do, you know, I'm not, I think there used to be, like, if you look at Greenberg and medium specificity, there are a lot of these ideologies that they're strict movements, and that's not me. So all the painting, the drawings, because one thing I want to go back to standalone sculptures a little bit, because a lot of this show is wall-based. So I want to play with that, hopefully either, you know, find other mentors and also maybe students, because that's something that happens oddly, like young people teach you how to do things as you claim to be teaching them or mentoring for them. But yeah, that's something I'm curious about at the moment. But I'm generally, if someone calls me a sculptor or a painter, I kind of recoil a little bit because I think of myself as a communicator. So if I have a concept, I'm trying to figure out what is the formal way for me to express this in the work. And right now I'm at a space where I really think I'm kind of in the groove, but I'm gonna relax now because COVID, the Rona is just running wild. So that gives me a time to have to relax a little more, because, you know, I need to be here to make work. I can't, if I'm gone, the work not gonna be here, so.
That builds on another question, actually. Someone wrote, how does Miami as your Africa influence this body of work or your work in general?
Well, Miami is the foundation. So as you travel through Miami and you travel through Little Haiti and you travel through Little Havana, you're seeing the same elements, the same spiritual elements in the work that are in these botanicas, right? So that was something that since I was in high school and in undergrad, right after graduation, something that was a very specific Miami experience. And also, you know, the micro and the macro, it's very specific because it's very it's tied to all these different traditions and how they approach things. Because Haiti is a lot more protective and closed, and in Cuban culture, it's spread through everybody. And we think of the saints. The saints are just kind of a mask that the spirits wear. It's another way to hide.
Another question we have is, you've talked about how you're an avid reader and you've mentioned Prince. What are some works of literature, recent works of literature and music that have inspired your work?
Marlon James. I also, when you listen to the playlist, hopefully you'll see that if you look at different genres of Black music, they are tied to the spiritual systems that of the performers. So you can't separate reggae from Rastafarianism. You can't separate hip hop from the 5% Nation of Islam. And you can't separate the blues from hoodoo. So in that playlist, I have all of these different blues songs that reference elements of hoodoo culture. So, and also, they need to let me not go into any bookstores because they're just going to take all my money. So I've been looking at, excuse me, looking at Mark Bradford, because I think Mark Bradford is the peak of what collage can do, and collage and painting, finding that way. I also was reading Afro-Pessimism by Wilkerson, and also I think Cast by Sister Wilderson. So, you know, I think I use the art as an excuse for me to read, because I was, when we had as we were preparing for this, I explained how the work starts in literature, and I try to find ways to transfer words into a visual language. And then once I get there, it's hard. That's why a lot of artists talk about how it's hard to write about the work, because you spend so long trying to communicate visually. But, you know, I also appreciate Donnamarie, because as she mentioned many a times, we sync up, we're reading the same things, we're reading we're exchanging articles that I'm like, yeah, I read that, that's cool, and vice versa.
We have another question that asks, are there specific people you have in mind for these pieces? And the focus on childhood and this concept of childhood stolen, is that part of the intent? And can you expound on that?
Okay, so if we look at Tamir Rice, you look at Trayvon Martin, all of these are babies. So we live in a society where children that are 8, 10 years old are thought of as monstrous brutes. But Lupe Fiasco, all of his children that are grown ass men are considered kids. Oh, don't worry about them. You know, if you look at these examples of these college kids that are doing assaults and different stuff, they get slaps on the wrist because they have the complexion for the protection. But childhood does not protect Black youth. And I also realized that no matter what the age of a person is, in the roadside memorials, they incorporate toys. And what happens if someone passes away, they're the youngest of the ancestors. So all of these toys are used in elements of, it's almost like security blankets. There are certain things that you give to children because it helps them transition from one stage of life into the next. So I think that in these roadside memorials, these childhood objects are about transition, the same way that the shells are about transition and easing that movement into the next world.
We have another question from a viewer on Facebook. Marvin Weeks asks, I am from the Gullah Coast. How do you feel South Florida's diverse African artists connect to a collective memory in developing work?
It just, I think sometimes there's so much. I think the part of us that we think is, the part of us that thinks that it thinks, that's the smallest amount of our brain. There's so much larger parts of our being and understanding that is a lot more tied into the cosmic. So I definitely feel that there is like this ancestral memory, because, you know, I don't understand how else to explain that found materials is so central to a lot of the work of African people. And I also think that there's this trickster tradition of using humor and using ways to subvert power. So I think we were the first products, like we were bought and sold. So going from a spiritual understanding of using, because if we were in West Africa, we would use, or even throughout the roots workers and the herbalists, they're using things that are organic, but I'm using things that are from the industry and things that were made for profit and made to build wealth for the other folks. So subverting that, taking, just like I would take an herb and turn it into something else. You know, I'm taking things from the market and transforming it to make whatever meaning that I want. And I think that's something that is important, because there are limits to what my work can do, but there are no limits to what the viewer can do. The viewer has, you know, they need to have more agency. They need to really not be apathetic. They need to find ways to change the conditions, you know, by any means necessary.
We also have one question from Donnamarie Baptiste. As a curator, what's it like working closely with an artist who you mesh so well with, and how does that add to your work and process?
Well, it's a dream. I mean, it's the dream. It's great. I mean, listen, I've worked with a lot of artists throughout my career, and from very, very different backgrounds. So I've not, you know, it's not like I've specifically only worked with Black artists or artists of the Black diaspora. I've worked with artists of every ethnic background at every level of their career. So sorry, my dog is in the picture, sorry. But I can say that when you work with an artist that you have the same kind of mindset and you think a lot alike, like T and I do, we think very much alike. And it makes the process so much easier, because I don't have to I never second guess my decision or my thought, because the one thing that I never want to do is have the art, is I want to make sure that the artist's voice is always front and center, is what I meant to say, is that the artist's voice is always front and center. This is their work. They're trusting you with their soul, you know, to put their soul out there for the world. And it's a very, very important and a very difficult job. So when I'm working with an artist like T. Eliott, who, you know, we've known each other for a long time, but we've never been like, we never hung out or anything like that. We just have always been good. You know, we just have always been good. When we see each other, it's all good. And we talk and we text and stay in touch and we send each other articles and we, you know, but when we were working on the show, it was like he was in my head and I was in his head, and it was just so easy. So if you're lucky enough as a curator to work with an artist that you really grasp the work, you know, and you both really think very much the same, it makes the choices easier. Because I would tell Sergio, I was like, okay, we're going to do this. He's going to love it. You know, like I don't have to, I know what he likes, you know, and I know what he wants, and I'm going to make sure that that is what the audience sees, what he wants and what he likes. So it's a dream. And I've worked with artists that have been somewhat difficult, and that's okay too, because you really have to up your game. But I've also worked with artists that were like, you just do it, you know, and that's okay too, because that makes it really easy. But I think the dream is working with an artist that you are in sync with. It just makes the process so much easier. And, you know, something like writing an essay about an artist's work, to me, I think is the most difficult responsibility of a curator's job. And it's one that just, I lose sleep over. I mean, I agonize over it, because I think I'm a good writer, but it takes me a long time. You know, I can't just, you know, it takes me a while. But, so yeah, so with T, writing the essay was agonizing, but it was easy because I knew exactly what I wanted to say. I knew exactly what he wanted me to say. And so I just had to get the words right. And yeah, I would highly recommend that if you get an opportunity, if there's an artist, if you're a curator, a cultural producer, and there's an artist that you want to work with because you really love their work and you really get their work, try to grasp that opportunity. It will make your experience much better, and you learn so much from that experience.
We have one more question from Zoom. This art speaks to so much other than art, ranging from the traditional artists of Central and West Africa to Louise Nevelson and even Grinling Gibbons. I want to know if T is consciously talking to these artists. Do you feel like saying anything to Louise Nevelson, for instance?
Well, I believe that, and this is something from it's great. I'm thinking about the essay, "The Death of the Author," and what I do, the works speak to other works. The work speaks. I'm not like a deity that tells you that this is the only way to interpret my scripture. Like there's a point when you release things into the world, and because there are other artists that are using monochromatic black, you know, it creates that conversation between these pieces, and the way that the different formal aspects, the different way that this work is made causes connection between these works. But there's tons of other stuff, you know, the flowers from Vanitas traditions and you know, all these things tied together. And I also think that that's what happens, that it creates space to find new meaning. You know, so I may not be able to have a certain analysis of the work, but you bring that perspective from your understanding of the world, and it allows you to see the work through a new lens, right? And this is something specifically that happens with art historians. And I am so thankful to work with Donnamarie Baptiste, because, you know, when I read the essay, it's like, I really felt like it was my thoughts coming back to me. It wasn't something that was a meaning that was forced upon the work outside of myself. So, you know, I still consider myself to be an emerging artist. And I think that when you have people writing, it's very important that they understand the work. because if you have someone write about your work and it's off, other people just gonna Google, they're gonna Google your name, find something from your past, from the person that didn't understand your work, then cut and copy and paste and move it around. And now you've got to deal with, for the next 20 years, you got to deal with somebody who got it wrong, and people finding ways to keep injecting that. And you just, you know, either you get frustrated, or someone says, that's perfect, I want to give you X amount of money. And now you're really screwed because you're pretending that it's about that, you know? I'm so happy. I don't know if it's just this talk or if it's the cafecito, but you know, I'm really happy that everyone has come out, and I'm happy with all of the questions, and want to thank all of the participants and those who helped behind the scenes.
Thank you very much, T.
That's
And
one
thank you
more
all for providing. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just one quick question. You did a lot of spiritual work to put this show together. How has that influenced you?
Well, I honestly can say that the spirituality is also, it's also metaphoric, because we're talking about power, right? And we're talking about ways of art making. So the collage logic, the assemblage logic, transformation of objects that come from a place of power and transform to a different conversation about power. Because privately, I think I'm very agnostic in some ways, not like towards the textbook definition, because it's not like I don't believe that, you know, I do believe that your spirit speaks, and there is a larger world. You know, I do believe that. I'm not someone who denies that we can ever know. I think individually, you have these intuitive sixth sense connections. So, but I will say that this space comes from, this work comes from a space of great hurt. And I don't know if there are people who remember the summer that Katrina hit. Every weekend there was a hurricane. Every weekend, back to back hurricanes that year. And that's how all of those uprisings, that's how all of those murders, that's how it felt, like that powerlessness of dealing with the same denial of justice, the same things that we have to experience over and over in generations, because this is what our foreparents were protesting about during you know, the harassment and the brutality, you know.
Thank you. Thank you all for providing such wonderful insight, and for providing such beautiful, wonderful insight into this beautiful body of work. Now we have a few closing words from art enthusiasts and the founder of Miami MoCAAD, Marilyn Hollifield.
Thank you, Dale. I think there was one more question in the Q&A from Charity. Was that question answered?
That question was answered, Marilyn.
Okay, thank you. Well, I want to say thank you to everyone who's joined us today. And it's been an extraordinary conversation, and we've viewed extraordinary art. I want to give deep thanks to T. Eliott Mansa, Donnamarie Baptiste, and Melissa Hunter Davis for this extraordinary conversation and presentation of art. We thank
Dale Jennings, whom I've known for, I'm not going to tell you how long, but a long time, for moving this program along. But we also have huge thanks to Sergio Sonuda and his wife, Luisa Lignarolo, owners of LNS Gallery. We have a huge thanks to our producers behind the scenes, volunteer extraordinaire, Michelle Johnson, our interns, Charlie Farrell, Luz Estrella Cruz, and Corbin Graves. We also thank the staff of LNS Gallery, who behind the scenes also provide that inspiration and superb assistance. This Miami MoCAAD collaboration in conversation and program in collaboration with the LNS Gallery created a space to discuss and appreciate art. As Miami MoCAAD moves forward, the art of T. Eliott Mansa will live in our spirit. And like the art of T. Eliott Mansa, Miami MoCAAD will inspire, it will provoke, it will touch the human spirit. It will show joy, it will show beauty, triumph, challenges, sorrow, and hope. It will connect diverse people within and outside the diaspora, locally and globally. In every way that we can imagine, this conversation and art presentation today make the words of the godmother of African-American art history, Dr. Samela Lewis, come alive. Her famous words ring true today. Art is not a luxury, as many people think. It is a necessity. It documents history, it educates, and it stores knowledge for generations to come. T. Eliott Mansa's art documents history. It educates, and it will store knowledge for generations to come. T. Eliott Mansa's art and this conversation presented provides powerful expressions of mourning and transform negative thoughts about Black into positive expressions of protection, beauty, creativity, and hope. T. Eliott Mansa's art compels us to say her name, to say his name, to say our names. The art of T. Eliott Mansa says the names of those gathered in the wind. So we ask you to go to the show and take in the art of T. Eliott Mansa. Thank you for joining us.
That was amazing, Madeline. Amazing.
The art and the conversation were amazing. And as I may have mentioned earlier, when I saw the art, it was powerful. When I heard the discussion about the art, it was even more powerful. And one of the themes of today is the theme that there's so many names that we don't know. There's so many names that get lost in the wind. And T. Eliott's title, his art, the power, the spirit, they give hope that as we begin to get more educated. We began to appreciate art coming from different parts of the world, from different spirits, that we will be able to store knowledge for generations to come. But more importantly, we will be able to connect across the Pan-African world that T. Eliott talked about, but also beyond, and connect within our communities and outside of our communities. So as Melissa said that she was overcome, and I was overcome. I believe that this has just been an extraordinary presentation. So thanks again to everybody who made it happen. And thanks again to everybody who joined us this Sunday afternoon when there are so many other things that you could have been doing. So in these moments that we have, we can look forward to next year. We can look forward to the end of the year. We can look forward to Art Week. And I hope everybody gets a chance to see the exhibit.